Good afternoon and welcome to OEC's Business and Environment Forum, Sustainability and Resilience, Rural Ingenuity and Infrastructure Innovation. My name is Jana Gastelum, and I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Environmental Council. I'm delighted to welcome you all today. OEC's Forum for Business and the Environment Speaker Series began in 1995 and has brought together thousands of business, environmental, social justice, government leaders, and legislators from across Oregon to explore key and cutting-edge issues important to Oregon's environment and economy. Today, we are delighted to have participants who RSVP'd from all four corners of Oregon, including Gold Beach, Burns in Ontario, Pendleton and Enterprise, and Astoria, and many places in between, like Prineville, Fossil, Hood River, and the Dalles, Klamath Falls, Roseburg, Cottage Grove, and Dallas. We also have representatives in the audience and on the panel from the Burns Paiute Nation and the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. Welcome, everyone. I also want to thank our leaders and lead sponsors for helping to make this event possible today. Amazon Web Services, Eugene Water and Electric Board, Intel, Soder Vineyards, and the Port of Portland. Just a few logistics before we dive in. I want to invite participants to submit questions using the Q&A function on the webinar. While we will endeavor to get to as many as possible, we may not get to them all. And as always, we appreciate you keeping your questions relevant and respectful. Today, I am really excited for our conversation. We are focusing on rural ingenuity, and I wanted to share a little bit about OEC's history with our rural outreach. Since the early 2000s, OEC has been reaching out to rural communities, first with our Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, and now with our Rural Partnership Initiative in a really intentional way. And as a statewide organization, we also have statewide representation on our board. In my time at OEC, I've seen unique partnerships, such as working with South Coast cranberry growers on sustainable practices that protect water quality and that have also allowed them to market their berries for a higher price. We've also worked with nurseries and wineries, bringing technical expertise to help with energy efficiency, carbon accounting, and renewable energy projects that help reduce energy costs and also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Most recently, we worked to get funding for Swally Irrigation District for their irrigation modernization work. Funding helped with piping canals so that they don't lose water, as well as critical fencing that ensured safety and privacy and kept their animals where they needed to be. Working on water together with those irrigation districts also opened up opportunities to get funding for rural electric utility vehicles. Every working farm and ranch has a couple of side-by-sides for doing on-site chores like hauling tools and fence posts, checking irrigation ditches, and scouting fields. We've helped put EV farm vehicles on the ground in 3 irrigation districts and 4 Oregon State University agricultural research stations so that students, irrigation district members, and other community members are able to see the vehicles in action and learn about how best to use them. In addition to modern features, they also eliminate diesel emissions, which helps protect farm worker health. OEC has also been on the ground for nearly 8 years in the lower Umatilla area, supporting work on groundwater and aquifer recharge and storage. Done properly, aquifer recharge can be a tool for resilience in the face of drought and can help rebuild our groundwater supplies. We serve on a groundwater management advisory body to help control nitrate contamination in the region, which has been a long and challenging experience. And as you'll hear from one panelist, these things take time and patience as well as funding. Finally, as a member of the Oregon Water Futures Initiative, a collaboration with environmental justice organizations, we help support interviews with members of tribes, culturally specific communities around the state, and low-income community members. Our rural areas are diverse and in some places more racially diverse than urban centers. You can read more about those interviews and a vision for water justice in the Oregon Water Futures Report and on their website. What we know from all this work is that there is a deep love for Oregon, community, and place in every region throughout our state. Environmental challenges and impacts are also felt in all corners of the state, but are heightened in some areas. We also know that solutions are sometimes more challenging with a lack of investment. And as this name speaks to for this event, there is ingenuity, resilience, and innovation that we can all learn from. And with that, I am delighted to introduce Heidi Kokar as our moderator today. Not only is Heidi one of OEC's board members, but she is a tremendous leader in her own right. Heidi is Executive Director of the Rural Development Initiative. Her education is in planning, public policy, and management, with an emphasis on rural development and nonprofit management. She grew up in a rural logging town in Southern Oregon at the height of changes in the region's timber industry that pitted various communities, industries, and interest groups against one another. She has passionately served rural communities for 24 plus years and is particularly committed to broad and ongoing development of diverse, skilled, and connected local leaders as the silver bullet solution to rural economic and community revitalization. Heidi advocates for the elevation of rural voices, increased rural investments and resources, and policies that specifically meet and address the unique needs and issues of rural communities. So it is a delight and honor to turn this over to Heidi now. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to a great program. Heidi, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Jana. It's so nice to be here, and it's such an honor to serve on OEC's board. I learn so much every single time I am with OEC's staff and board. For those of, thank you for the introduction as well. I feel like I had a piece of my introduction that I can let go of, and I appreciate that. But I would like you to spend a little bit of time introducing Rural Development Initiatives, which is the nonprofit rural development hub that I work for and have worked for the past 25 years. Nationally, RDI is known for the work that we do to strengthen rural engagement and leadership. But we were founded 33 years ago to help Oregon revitalize its rural economies at the time of the downfall of the timber industry related to federal policy. And achieving economic vitality for rural places is still at the very heart of RDI's mission. In addition to that work that we do to build economy and build engagement in rural communities, we also work to elevate rural voices and issues, as Jenna mentioned, and currently over 30% of our work is helping Spanish speakers start new and local businesses. At RDI, we have this uncompromising belief that the answers and priorities that are driven by local people and built from the foundation of the local assets there are what is key to achieving vitality for rural places. In 2022, we asked U of O history professor Stephen Beta for his help in understanding rural and the rural divide, the rural-urban divide better. And what he taught us at that time was fascinating. And I think better understanding the rural context can only help us strengthen our impact for rural places. So I want to talk a little bit about what we learned from Stephen. First of all, rural and the rural-urban divide are both relatively new concepts. Just over 100 years, we didn't talk much about rural at all. Rural became into being as a result of strategic structural wartime investments in the early 1900s that fueled urbanism and strengthened urban centers. Rural was then everything else. Moreover, only 50 years ago, within my lifetime, there really was no talk of rural-urban divide. That may be because the demarcation was fairly new and our independence was still top of mind, but it might also be because policymakers still instinctively design policies such as the New Deal and others to include deliberate investments into rural infrastructure, rural issues, and rural economies, and did so for the betterment of the whole. The divide we hear about today began in the 70s and 80s alongside the collapse of the extraction economy and the simultaneous emergence of a new tech economy. Urbanization has continued at an approximate rate of 2% per year, and today rural makes up nationally 97% of the land area, only 19% of the population, but sees only 7% of our investments. While urbanization has created many efficiencies and positives, it also served to erode our awareness of rural interests and our interdependence. 79% of the United States' high poverty counties are rural, and to them, it has also resulted in what feels like the political abandonment of rural interests and investments, extraction from their point of view without reinvestment. Demographers and more people than I can count, more conversations that I can imagine, struggle for a common and useful definition of the word rural. And to me, rural places are simply smaller, less populated, and separated from urban centers and support. They are not less than, or less important, or less relevant than they ever were to the whole. Among many things, they are the places that the whole relies upon for food, natural resources, and their stewardship. Their issues are often similar, but rarely simpler. Rural problems can be exacerbated by the reality that rural people take these issues on with less funding, fewer, if any, paid staff, and they rarely find successful models that were designed for them, trusted information sources, or peers from whom they can learn. RDI understands these challenges, and we are a trusted resource to rural people in places in 4 states in the Pacific Northwest, and we are on, collectively, a mission to strengthen rural people, places, and economies. The word rural is a demarcation that denotes a periphery to power. It creates separation and a power dynamic that is neither agreed upon nor has proven very useful. There is a temptation to still think of rural as everywhere else, but it's not. Rural is its own unique thing, and those real differences are worthy of our curiosity, our interests, and our investment. Over the past 25 years, I have seen rural curiosity emerge. I have watched that curiosity grow into rural interest, rural partnerships, and rural programs. And I am starting to see it blossom into new political interests and new investments. The way I see it, the rural divide is the result of an unobservable, slow, but steady loss of collective rural consciousness. It's an intentional abandonment of our interdependence and the sneaking creation of competition against our collective best interests. It helps me to think of it this way, because what if the answer to this seemingly unfixable problem is logically and strategically more awareness, more connections? What if it's people being more connected to each other and the environments around it? What if it's people meeting their own needs by investing in the needs of others? I like it because in this way, it kind of seems doable. I might be able to reach mission. It seems hopeful, and dare I see, it seems friendly. Next month, I'll be in front of 300 leaders, policymakers, and partners from around the region and nation at RDI's Regards to Rural Conference. And today it's an honor to join all of you. There's many of us in this audience as we talk about rural innovation, rural leaders, uplift rural leaders, and environmental solutions. I so look forward to hearing from the guests today, and I thank OEC for inviting me to join you. It all gives me hope. Today, we're going to explore 3 different topics. Transportation. Transportation is a critical need for communities to connect people to necessities like jobs, healthcare, schools, and food. However, rural communities face unique challenges to both transportation services and infrastructure. Today, you'll hear how one of Oregon's 9 Native nations is working to meet an enormous region's transportation challenges. We'll also talk about natural and working lands and how they experience extreme weather impacts at a breakneck speed. We'll hear about solutions that not only help sequester carbon into plants and soils, but also how they help with adaptation to climate change. And finally, water. It seems to be coming too fast or not at all at different times of the year. Drought declarations and drought emergencies happen earlier and earlier in the year, and persistent water scarcity is becoming a real reality for communities. You'll hear about innovation solutions from the Deschutes Basin. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce our first guest, Danny Schulte. Danny is the transportation planner for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, also known as CTUIR, for those who love them most. Prior to entering the planning field, Danny worked for the EV charger manufacturer Shore Power and the electronics recycler Free Geek. Upon graduating from the Masters of Urban and Regional Planning program, she left Portland to begin working for CTUIR in Pendleton, Oregon, where she learned how to drive at the age of 29. Danny's core professional goal is to support sustainability and environmental justice. And working for CTUIR has been a fulfilling opportunity to apply both of those principles to support the tribal community by improving safe access to walking, biking, transit, and horse riding transportation modes. Welcome, Danny. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you. Hi, folks. As Heidi said, my name is Danny Schulte. I'm the transportation planner for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation in Northeastern Oregon. I also sit on the Oregon State Safe Routes Advisory Committee and the Northeast Area Commission on Transportation, and I was the transit program manager for Kayak Public Transit for half of last year, which kind of illustrates, as I'm sure many of you more rural viewers are aware, that rural staff wear a lot of hats. There we go. Just to give you an idea of where I'm at, this is the Umatilla Indian Reservation. In green is the current area, although the original treaty boundary is in gray. The area is 271 square miles with a population of just over 3,000 people. So it's a pretty rural area, and it might be surprising to see that an area this sparsely populated has a transportation planner. If you're familiar with planning offices, that's, kind of where it tends to go into the county. But as a sovereign nation, CTUIR's planning office operates as the entire bureaucratic stack. So the city, county, state, federal government, interstate organization, all of that is done within my office. So, and the Umatilla Indian Reservation is a gorgeous and unique place that that y'all should certainly visit if you're ever in for the rodeo in Pendleton for the rodeo. And it is this is part of the view from the lookout point at the I-84 stop called Dead Man's Pass, which is one of the deadliest stretches of interstate highway on the federal system. So, it's a gorgeous community, but one that is intersected by deadly transportation infrastructure. So, one of the solutions to this community has been transit. Although rural areas, like I said, sparsely populated, don't typically have much in the way of transit, we have built a really impressive network to serve not only the reservation community, but CTUIR and Kayak consider our service area to be the entire ceded territory described in the 1855 treaty. So that goes up into Washington, all the way to the Tri-Cities area, and east, west, and south of us. So Kayak Public Transit, branches out from the Pendleton area, but it is serving a lot of northeastern Oregon. So this is kind of the history of Kayak. Back in 2001, it was started as primarily service for seniors and disabled riders, getting folks just in between the mission community and the city of Pendleton to meet their basic needs. That was, it's a 4 to 6 mile round trip. It was a very, kind of basic needs service. But quickly the surrounding communities recognized that this basic service is needed for a much broader population. There are so many people who can't drive due to, whether it be age, disability, criminal record. There's a lot of reasons that people can't drive and need to get around places. And so, in 2008, we started providing service to Pendleton, Weston, Athena, Adams, Pilot Rock, and LeGrand, all in one go. And then in 2009, we expanded again to Hermiston, Milton, Freewater, and then in Washington, College Place, Walla Walla, and Kennewick. And that was all done through a contracted transit firm, but we brought that in-house just through 2013 to 2015, where we started to really just try and bring it all in-house and make sure that we know where the funds are going and we know how it's operating. So today we operate a system that serves 18 communities, 4 counties, and 2 states. In 2018, we celebrated our millionth rider milestone. That was about 6 years early from projections. Back when we were setting up service in 2008 and 2009, we were expecting to hit that around now, and we hit it about 6 years early. So we could tell that the service was deeply needed. But the COVID-19 pandemic, as with almost any other transit agency around the world, really, we saw an enormous drop off in ridership, and we've never really recovered. But even so, the transit service is growing. We're about to start up Boardman service this spring, and a new small EV campus shuttle, plus taking over the Milton Freewater route just last month. So this is our service area today. I'm not sure if you're seeing like a little here, I'm going to try and move this because my map is covered. But this is our service area today, and I included a link. So let's see if I can make sure that that works correctly. Here we go. Google Maps, just so you can see what it actually looks like on the ground. I was told that transit map doesn't do it justice. So here we are in in Pendleton and the Mission community. If you zoom out, it takes about to here to see everywhere we go. So Boardman to LeGrand is about a 90-minute drive on a 70-mile-an-hour freeway. And Walla Walla to Pilot Rock, north to south. And then the kind of most urgent, most frequently requested service to restore is up to about here, the Pasco Airport, which is kind of our major-ish regional airport. So we cover a lot of ground, and most of these are because the communities asked us to. And now I'm gonna go back. Kayak has always been a fare free transit service. We started that way from day one. In a rural context, the cost of operating with a fare box usually outweighs the actual revenue that you see from fares, and in rural areas, you see a higher ratio of riders of need, people who don't really have other transportation options. So, we kind of made the decision early on that it was more important that for them to have that $2 to $5 per trip than for us. And all of these routes are fixed route services. But as the transportation planner, I don't only focus on transit. We just did a major transportation system plan update and in that plan update, we kind of organized it with our priorities, the community's priorities. Extensive outreach developed to this plan, and the number one priority is safety. And when you look at kind of the statistics of transportation safety, since the COVID-19 pandemic, the vehicle fatalities have increased quite a lot. In 2022, there were almost 43,000 fatal vehicle accidents. That's the number of accidents, or crashes, and that means the fatalities are higher than that. And that's up 16% since 2018. So we're seeing a worsening, even while many jurisdictions are adopting, Vision Zero and all of these other ways to prioritize safety. But less than 1% of those involve public transit. Second priority, environmental and cultural heritage. Most of these vehicles that we operated are diesel vehicles, but even so, a passenger car emits, an internal combustion engine passenger car emits 89 pounds of CO2, while a diesel bus sorry, I hit my time. My duck didn't go off. But in any case, regardless of the fuel, the transit performs much better than regular cars, and then and in rural areas, it's more of a reality than EVs. And then equity, essentially, like the people using transit are people who need transportation options by and large. So I'll just kind of skate over these things, but just to kind of look at like the comparison between safety on reservations. And this will be available to you. I've already sent it to OEC. But transit is a safer travel mode. We have our drivers are very responsible, and they have a responsible network, and there are a lot of challenges, and I hope that you guys that our conversation today will start to raise how that looks in many rural areas, but it's the lack of resources largely that makes it challenging for rural areas to meet the needs. And the needs are typically like, longer distances. People who have to walk because they have no transit have to walk miles. So I think this will be a good conversation about how to look at many dimensions of rural needs, and I'm excited to talk to you guys about how transit fits into that. Yeah.
Thank you, Danny. And I love hearing how, I mean, it is such a very large area, and it's large on a map. It's really large in person, and also how community centered and compassionate your energy and effort has been in creating a transportation system that's truly serving the community and the community of need there. So thank you so much. It's fascinating and also inspiring. So as a reminder to everyone in the audience, you can submit questions down below, and we'll try to get to them as many as possible during our question and answer series or session at the end of our webinar. But for now, I would like to welcome Tom Reitman. Tom and his family have raised livestock and dryland crops in the vicinity of Condon, Oregon. Much of their farmland has been converted to perennial grass, stabilizing fragile soils and rebuilding soil organic matter. Current farming methods emphasize as little tillage as possible, and multiple landlords are partners in conservation practices. Tom will discuss how Oregon's farms, forests, and ranches can help absorb carbon and build rural resilience. Welcome, Tom. It's so nice to see you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here to share our story of managing land. My Reitman ancestors left Switzerland in 1848 during a period of global cooling, settling first in Illinois, then near Ione, Oregon, where they homesteaded in the 1880s. And my grandparents starved out there due to drought and low prices, and eventually moved to our present location between Condon and Wasco in 1939. I was born in Condon in 1958 and grew up farming and ranching with my parents. My wife and I raised our children on the ranch. Our oldest son, Jacob, is now managing the cattle, and our son, Benjamin, works for USDA in Washington, D.C., and our daughter, Annika, just 6 months ago started as an emergency room nurse in Boise. I began working full-time on the ranch in 1981. Since then, we have adapted several practices aimed at controlling soil erosion, as was mentioned, such as reducing tillage, rotational grazing, and replanting native vegetation. Our goal at first was simply to keep our own soil on our own land, but over time, we have come to recognize the added benefits to the environment. Here on the dry side of Oregon, our average annual precipitation is 10.5 inches. We must stretch the available moisture as best we can. We have no water sources for irrigation. The adage that rain will follow the plow did not work out here. So in this photo, the Devil's Butte fire last summer revealed erosion ditches. Tons of good topsoil washed away during the tillage years, not only depleting the productivity of the fields, but also that muddy water running downstream smothered spawning beds and silted in the pool behind the John Day Dam. So we knew that we had to change, that what we were doing was not sustainable. The introduction of glyphosate herbicide in the 1980s was a revolution that enabled us to kill weeds without tillage and then direct seed into standing grain stubble. Next slide, please. I emphasize that we have to be economically sustainable. And so this practice was a convergence of economics and ecology. It enabled us to continue farming the land without losing soil. At that time, no-till drills were expensive and unproven. And my father's adage was, be not the first by which the new is tried, nor the last to lay the old aside. So it's been a gradual change, but we are now direct seeding all of our farmland. Part of this shift was prompted by the USDA Conservation Reserve Program, which began in 1986. The CRP allowed us to seed officially designated highly erodible land to perennial grass and stop farming it. We enrolled our steepest and most erodible fields. The government payment made it economically sustainable, and in retrospect, it was the right decision. Although that was not certain at the time. The downside of the CRP program was that once the grass was established, there was very little activity on the land. Today, 3/4 of the CRP payments in Gillum County go to absentee landowners. The population of Condon is half what it was, and our school enrollment has declined from 530 students when I started first grade to 130 today. So with this change, we have transitioned to raising more livestock. Next slide, please. Most of the land we manage was never suitable for farming. This is actually a view from my bedroom window. But I think we're fortunate that it was too steep and too rocky to farm because it was preserved and didn't lose soil. Next slide, please. Riparian areas are an indicator of the health of a watershed, like the canary in the coal mine or an endangered species. Before CRP and no-till farming, Ferry Creek was a moonscape of eroded channels. At the same time CRP was introduced and farming practices were changing, the Bureau of Land Management asked us to change the season when we graze cattle. And this, coupled with greater efforts to keep livestock off the creeks by fencing and herding, allowed the riparian vegetation to flourish. Beavers moved in and have built dozens of dams. In the past, their attempts to establish were wiped out by muddy water flows. We still have flooding, but the water is clean and immensely less damaging. Next slide, please. So, and this is an example of the creek with grazing, and by following the BLM guidelines and getting the cattle out in a timely way, the grass has plenty of time to recover, as well as the willows and other plants. Next slide, please. The CRP is an example of a government program with good intent, but also some unintended consequences. Congress established the program in 1985 to stop soil loss, and it also bailed out many farmers and their bankers, I should add, in a time of financial distress in agriculture. But a result of the program has been land retirement, and without farming or grazing, the land becomes stagnant and the ability to sequester carbon declines. Vigorously growing perennial grasses not only convert CO2 to oxygen, but build organic matter in the soil, which is sequestered forever. 80% of the mass of perennial grasses is in the roots. So even when faced with wildfires, these grasses release only a fraction of the carbon that would be released by a forest fire. Working land programs, such as the Oregon Legislature's 2023 Natural Climate Solutions Bill, will help us and other farmers and ranchers across the state keep the land productive, which is more profitable and sequesters more carbon. By providing funding to support Oregon landowners and managers in adopting climate-smart practices on farms, rangeland, and wetlands, this new law is a good example of how government leaders can help rural communities and economies while also addressing climate change. Pipelines and water troughs will enable us to graze livestock on expiring CRP land. Whenever we contemplate farming this land again, I remember why we seeded it to grass. Erosion on this particular field was very bad, and it was right next to the highway, so everybody could see it. In the early 80s, when we were farming with tillage, water erosion tunneled under the lower part of this field, and I recall a combine falling in a ditch that took us 3 days to extricate. I don't want to do that again. Steep land and shallow soils are expensive to farm and not that productive anyway. Local soil and water conservation districts are a great avenue to channel funding. We have recently received grants for about 5 miles of new pipeline and multiple troughs, road building, cross fencing, juniper clearing, and timber thinning, etc. There's more need than can be met. The Regional Conservation Partnership Program money that we had the last few years is running out this year. Only 4 of 28 applications were funded. We hope that the 2023 Natural Climate Solutions Bill will help leverage historic new federal investments from the Inflation Reduction Act funding for climate smart land management practices. We already know at least 150 million will be available to Oregon through 2026, just from 3 NRCS programs. The new Natural Climate Solutions Fund will help support cost sharing for Oregon landowners, managers, and can help make sure we are able to access and benefit from these needed federal investments. In Condon, grants plus revenue from other sources such as renewable energy projects, as well as property taxes, have helped us to build a new grade school, fire station, fund our local medical clinic, upgrade sewer and water systems, sustain the city park, swimming pool, upgrade buildings, construct sidewalks, and many other things. And we have 10 new housing units under construction, which is huge for our small town. We would like to provide more public transportation. Maybe Danny can help us with that. We do not have the option my ancestors had to move to new land, so we have to make the most of where we are. Farming and ranching tend to be intergenerational because it takes a long time to put together enough land to make an economic unit. And we are fortunate to have many landlords who share our conservation and economic ideals. So I guess I think my time is about up. So I'm just going to talk about integrating livestock can be a winning combination for farmers by creating economic value from land that is not farmed. And even on farmland, things like cover crops are made more profitable by integrating livestock. And just to mention about cattle, yeah, we hear about the methane that they emit, but without, I guess the truth is there's going to be cattle produced somewhere. So is it better to have them on land like this, or in a feedlot with fed corn shipped from the Midwest? So our goal is to continue to be economically sustainable while caring for the land so that it is productive for many generations to come. Next slide, please. So this is our newest family. Oh, this is a picture of, I forgot about this one. Yeah, so this is our grandson that was just born, and with my wife, and we hope that he learns to love the land in the same way that we have. Thank you.
Tom, what a lovely, lovely gift to hear from you and your experience. But also, I think what's something that struck me is how much you talked about the intersection of kind of stewarding the lands as well as economic development, how important those two things are in rural communities as we try to keep communities together as well as steward the natural resources around them. So thank you for for speaking with us today. There are a few questions that are being asked in the question and answer portion, but please feel free to continue to add your questions. I'm now pleased to introduce our final panelist, Phil Chang. Phil sits on the Deschutes County Board of Commissioners. He has made Bend his home for 20 years and raised his son there. He has worked for over 25 years to help rural communities build sustainable economies, where workers can combine making a living with being good stewards of the environment. For 3.5 years, Phil promoted local community needs and federal funding and policy decisions as U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley's Central Oregon field rep. Phil holds a BA from Columbia University and an MS in environmental science, policy, and management from UC Berkeley. Welcome, Phil.
Everyone. So I'm Phil Chang. That was a pretty complete introduction. The one last thing I would say about myself is that I currently also sit as one of the co-chairs of the Deschutes Basin Water Collaborative, along with a very legendary tribal natural resource manager named Bobby Bruno from the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. So today I'm going to try to tell you in very broad brush a story of a drought-strained river basin and about the efforts to collaboratively conserve water so that we can stretch limited supplies and meet all the needs in our basin. And with that, let me introduce you to the Deschutes Basin. So the Deschutes Basin is about 10,000 square miles. It originates in the Ochco Mountains and in the east side of the Cascade Mountains, and it flows north towards the Columbia. Oops. It's also a very drought-prone basin. So here's just a couple of drought maps from 2 years ago, March 22nd in 2022, and just recently at the end of January this year. This year we've gotten a decent amount of snow, but even with the decent amount of snow we've gotten, this part of the state of Oregon was still in drought at the end of January, and it will take a lot more snow for us to get out of drought conditions. I'm guessing we'll still be in drought conditions at the end of the wet season this year. This is a condition that I believe is being exacerbated by climate change, and that we need to kind of accept as the new normal moving forward in the Deschutes Basin, and that affects the way that we plan for and use water here. This is the way that water is currently allocated in the Deschutes Basin. So if you ask the question, who gets water in the Deschutes Basin, this is who gets water. 86% of the water in the basin is dedicated to irrigated agriculture. About 12% of the water in the basin is by right dedicated to in-stream uses, and about 2% of the water used in the basin is for municipal, domestic, residential purposes. To give you a feel for kind of the magnitude of these percentages, so the agricultural use in the Deschutes Basin is probably about 725,000 acre feet of water per year. So an acre feet is enough water to fill an acre of land 1 foot deep. So 725,000 acre feet to agriculture. On the municipal end, we're talking about 45,000 acre feet of water for all the municipal, domestic, residential uses in the basin. This is the flow regime that results from that water rights allocation. The things to note are that in the winter, we are trying to store a lot of water in the top of the Deschutes Basin in reservoirs like Wickiup. This means that the upper Deschutes River is very low, that the flow is very low in the winter. And then, the river does gain some volume as it goes downstream, but It's very low for much of the upper Deschutes River. By contrast, in the middle of summer, all that water that was being stored over the winter is being released at much higher than natural, like historic natural summer flow volumes. The upper Deschutes is basically used like an irrigation ditch to convey water down to a bunch of irrigation diversions right around the city of Bend. And then below the city of Bend, the middle Deschutes in the summer is very, very low. So you can see that there's places in both situations where flow is abnormally high or unnaturally low. And that has a lot of impacts for fish and wildlife habitat. The other thing to note about our current set of rights and the current kind of flow regime in the river is that um, there are big parts of agriculture that don't get enough water, particularly farmers with junior irrigation rights. And one of the big concerns that's emerging right now is that among domestic water users, domestic supply users, is that groundwater levels have declined substantially in the Deschutes Basin, particularly in the Redmond and Bend areas. So these impacts are both environmental and economic. You know, farms can't run without water. River recreation suffers when there's not enough flow in the river. Urban growth is constrained. So there are a lot of environmental concerns and there are a lot of economic concerns with the current allocation of water in our more and more drought-prone Deschutes River Basin. This slide just helps to lay out where the unmet needs are. So we've done a lot of analysis and planning in the Deschutes Basin, and it's projected that over the next 50 years, if we want to really address the needs of all users in the basin and have harmony and balance and ecological and economic sustainability, we need a lot more water in our rivers and streams for our in-stream needs. Currently, in the Deschutes Basin, we have something called a groundwater mitigation program set up. And so municipalities are able to get new water rights by helping to put flow back in rivers and streams. So that's why you see this little blue arrow coming out of the rivers and streams unmet needs circle. And then in agriculture, as I mentioned, there are junior irrigators, people who have junior irrigation rights who really have marginal supplies these days in our drought-strained environment. So how would we get from where we are to a more sustainable river basin? Basically, we need to conserve a whole lot of water, and then we need to share that water among the entities who need it. One of the places where we have had a lot of focus in the basin in the last 20 years is in irrigation modernization. So this is doing things like piping canals and laterals, converting farmers from flood irrigation to more efficient irrigation practices, more efficient application practices. This can be improving measurements, monitoring and management of water, and it can also be about which crops you choose to grow, which have different water needs. So a little bit more about canal piping and on-farm efficiency. So here's a picture of a real live irrigation canal in the Deschutes Basin, at least on the left side of my screen. And we have about 700 miles of canals in Central Oregon. As you can see, this is a very porous and fractured volcanic rock. And so these irrigation canals may leak 50% of the water that is diverted from the river into the irrigation canal back into the ground. So as a result of that, we are possibly diverting twice as much water out of our rivers to get a molecule of water to a farmer than we need to. And so by piping canals, that's kind of a schematic cross section on the right. By piping canals, we can eliminate a lot of water loss through seepage. The water that is saved essentially doesn't have to be diverted from the river, and it can be permanently protected in the river. We can create in-stream rights under the laws of the state of Oregon. And these pipe canals also create opportunities to both pressurize the irrigation systems that are used to put the water on the land, and also to generate hydropower inside the pipe. So two energy saving opportunities, or energy generation and energy saving opportunities there. So we're not just saving water, we're saving energy. This slide just helps people understand a little bit the way that sprinkler irrigation is superior in a lot of ways to flood irrigation. So on the left side of, at least on my screen, you can see a flood irrigated field. Basically, water is only getting to the low parts of the field. They try to sheet water across the entire thing, but it flows to the lowest points. So there's only parts of the field that are adequately watered. And then on the right side, you can see that a sprinkler system, putting water out at much lower flow volume over time can apply that water much more evenly, and the ground has a lot more opportunity to soak it up. So not only is it better in terms of water actually getting to crop plants, but it's also the amount of water that you need to put on the land for flood irrigation is way more than the amount of water you need to put on an equivalent size piece of land through sprinkler irrigation. So those are some of the key ways that we have saved water in the Deschutes Basin in the last couple of decades. And this is a really fully explaining this slide would take a long time, but basically these brown on this side of the slide, you see places where we can find new water, conserve water, or take water out of uses that are going away, like when land's urbanized. On the other side of the slide in blue, you see where water is needed. There's a lot of reaches of river that need water, and some of our junior rights irrigation districts and our cities also need water in the future. The middle part of this slide is all the super legalistic, bureaucratic, complex stuff that needs to happen to actually take water and move it to where it's needed. Because it's one thing to actually save water. It's another thing to actually be able to give it to the place where it's needed. And if people may have more questions, we can talk a lot more about that slide at the end. Lastly, I just wanted to say that I talked a lot about saving water in agriculture. That really helps us with our surface water system. But we are experiencing groundwater declines in the Deschutes Basin. Almost all of the groundwater use in the Deschutes Basin is for municipal, residential, domestic uses. So if we want to slow those groundwater declines, we need to help our cities and our homes and our businesses use less water. And here's just a couple examples: xeriscaping, low flow shower heads. There are all kinds of things we can do to reduce domestic water consumption in our communities. Lastly, I would say a lot of this is happening within, all of these efforts are happening now within this framework of the Deschutes Basin Water Collaborative. And this is, again, a multi-stakeholder effort to collaboratively save water so that we can meet all needs in the basin. And with that, I would just say, I think we're ready to go to questions now.
Thank you, Phil. I just always in awe of how with these wicked problems like water really is, how many people we can bring together to work on those problems. And so the importance of connections and collaborations and relationships just stands out from what you say, but also just the skills of and complexity of this problem. So thank you. So I'd like to now invite Danny and Tom to join us back on the screen so you can start your video again for the question and answer panel discussion. To our audience, I think Ron Bunch is winning. And so if for the raffle for the most questions asked, Ron's winning. So if anyone wants to start to get on that, go ahead and do that. But feel free to continue to send questions. And I also hope you are thinking about how does this relate to the issues and problems you have. So it can not only be a question about what they've said, but maybe what their thoughts are about what you're going through. But to manage the question and answer, I would like to introduce Karen Lewatsky, who is OEC's Water Program Director and Rural Partnership Initiative, the director of that as well. Karen's going to lead the question and answer, and I can't wait to hear the responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you enjoyed those presentations as much as I did. As our presentations illustrated, while many of the high-level challenges we face in Oregon are common to both urban and rural environments, things like transportation, stable and dependable livelihoods, and reliable water supplies, those challenges play out in really different ways depending on the setting. Now we're going to open the Q&A, just like Heidi said. I'm glad she changed it from manage to lead, because I'm not sure you can really manage a question and answer period. But please put your questions in the chat, and while we can't guarantee we'll get to all of them, we'll do our best to see that each presenter is able to answer at least one or two questions before we get to the end of our day. I'm going to start with a question for Danny. Danny, when you think about what rural communities need in terms of transportation, can you give us sort of a small snapshot of what that would be?
Yeah, money.
That was a small snapshot.
Yeah. Well, funding transit systems is very complicated. There's a lot of oversight. There's funding streams from federal, state, private. There are tribal streams. There are, competitive programs. There are formula programs, and it's all really complex, and managing it is messy. So trying to figure out how to run all these different programs with, for example, like different match rates, like one, you have to remember when you're paying your bills, like, okay, this one is on this specific route and that one has a 50-50 match rate. And this one is on this other route that's got a 20-80, like a 20% match rate. It's all very complicated. And, since our system runs entirely off of those grant funds, I think what I love to see, and I don't think it's applied exactly universally, is when there is a balance, a very intentional balance of rural transit funding versus urban transit funding. Because as Heidi mentioned, that balance of resource distribution just isn't there. And, as much as we work really hard to apply for the competitive grants, there's always going to be somebody who's better at grant writing than I am. And because of the laws of math, more of those people are going to be in urban areas. There's more people there. There's more people to be better at grant writing than I am.
Thank you for that. Tom, when you think about your ranch, which has been in a traditionally or historically dry part of Oregon, it sounds like you may have gotten to the struggles that you're experiencing sooner than some other folks in our state that are only now starting to be impacted by drought and other climate-fueled weather streams. what could those folks learn from your land management practices over the years that you've done to help improve their chances of sustainability across time?
Well, that's an interesting question. In theory, we're not supposed to be able to raise crops on our low rainfall. And so the traditional way that we've done that is by having a fallow year and then a crop the following year. But we can't really build carbon in the soil. We spent a lot of years depleting carbon with tillage, and now with no-till, we've stopped the depletion, but we really can't build it back up without having some kind of a perennial crop like grass, or having a annual crop when it rains. So yeah, I think that trying to, as we did, get the most highly erodible land and the steep ground, the less productive ground seeded to grass, and the payment is very good from the CRP program. And so that's what I would advise: farm your good ground and put your poor ground in CRP.
Thank you. And now here's a question for you, Phil. Can you talk a little bit about how the water rights that are guaranteed to the Warm Springs Reservation to the north, which is the way the river flows, how that affects this larger conversation that you're talking about?
Yeah. So the rights that are the rights that the Warm Springs tribes possess are the most senior rights. They trump everyone, and they are rights but they are rights for a diversion for agriculture. So the Warm Springs tribes have not exercised those rights, but they hold them, and they are again, they have the kind of most, they would trump any other rights, if push came to shove. So that is part of the, I would say it's part, they function as part of the soft power of the Warm Springs tribes in collaborative relationships in the Deschutes Basin. Mostly the tribes lead by just being very knowledgeable, respectful, and patient asserters of their claims to their ancestral and treaty rights. But they do kind of that's always there are many people who know that there's that exists as a hammer basically in their back pocket if they ever had to use it.
Thank you for explaining that. I think we have another question here for Danny. Danny, as the state thinks about next year's transportation package, which we're already starting to talk about, what kinds of funding or funding reforms would be helpful for kayak?
There's well, as I mentioned in the funding package, I don't envy those folks who have to come up with those packages, because I know it's a really complicated process. And but what is a huge headache for us is that we end up getting grants that are from the same source that have different match rates, which is like I said, literally paying the gas bill, right? The fuel bill for one route that's under the same program. They just allocated it out differently. That has a different match rate, so that every single fuel bill has to be paid with a different match rate. It's the kind of bureaucracy that it's like the individuals who make the rules don't see it, and so they don't have to recognize what a drain it is on transit providers, right? And I think I think there's something to be said for staffing appropriately. Kayak is a 24 staff operation, and 17 to 19 of those are drivers. So we really are, running over here on a shoestring, right? It's an enormous weight of administrative work. And if there's any way that like the state can reduce that administrative workload, that I think will inevitably help rural agencies, because all of us are small.
Thank you. So Tom, thinking of the incentives that we've talked about, like CRAP or like this new state fund, what are some of the things that we can do to make sure those funds are A, going where they need to go, but B, being used in the way that has their intended effect, that gives us back what those public funds are designed to do, which is either sequester carbon, preserve soil quality, et cetera. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, we do have a network of soil and water conservation districts in Oregon that are experienced in allocating funds, and I think there are fewer strings attached to this funding source from the climate from the state bill, and so they have more flexibility, and then they can in turn use those funds to leverage federal funds that they might not get otherwise. So that's the organization that I would that I'm most familiar with that would work in our county, and also the OWEB, we have a watershed council that works with the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and so that's another avenue. And then the Oregon Extension Service provides some technical assistance. So we have quite a good infrastructure in Oregon.
So it sounds like you're saying we've got organizations on the ground locally that can help folks access those funds, but also be accountable for the outcomes that we're after with those funds.
Yes, I believe that's true.
Thank you. So Phil, I was wondering if you could perhaps address a couple of things. First thing would be the funding source for those agricultural conservation improvements, I believe are primarily federal funds, but require a state match. Can you talk a little bit about that and what it is the state can do to make sure that we access as many of those federal funds as we possibly can?
That's absolutely right. That for the canal piping projects, the majority of the money is coming through a USDA program called the title of it is PL 566, and it does have match requirements. They don't have to be state match requirement. It doesn't have to be state funding, but the state is one of the most likely, players to actually have the kind of capital resources to be able to provide significant match. Irrigation districts also with many of these canal piping projects, if they're piping sections that have a significant amount of gradient drop, there are opportunities to generate hydropower, so they can finance part of the canal piping project and then pay back, have a revenue stream to pay back part of the piping project with hydropower revenues over the years. Some of the other work, though, that the on-farm efficiency work that is being done, that Tom mentioned the RCPP program within NRCS. There are other sources within the Natural Resource Conservation Service at the USDA that are also really good opportunities to fund that work. And actually also federal in origin, the federal government sent about $38 million to Deschutes County during the COVID pandemic through the American Rescue Plan, and we turned around and we put $1.5 million of that into on-farm efficiency projects, with something like a 50% match. So that was actually provided by the landowners. So landowners have a role to play in the on-farm projects. The irrigation districts have a role to play in the canal piping projects, and then federal and state funding is really important to making all of those things work.
Thank you for that. Danny, this is one for you. I believe in conversations I've had with you before, there was kind of an interesting discussion of the challenges of building a workforce in a rural community. Getting the kind of people you need to do the kind of jobs you need to get done. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for your city dwelling participants, get out of there. I can move out here. No, I say that as someone who did that, so I bias, but we've had challenges filling every high level position, and now some things around like the COVID pandemic and kind of a generation of like it seemed like the baby boomer generation had kind of a long work phase, and then kind of all have come into retirement around the same time. So there are now a lot of very high level positions open in our community and a lot of rural communities. I've seen the same problem occurring in, like all across the Northeast Area Commission on Transportation. So that's, the entire north half of ODOT Region 5, Eastern Oregon. And, we're all kind of having the same thing where like folks who were who are retiring later than 65, age older than 65, and all of a sudden we have vacant high level positions open. It's really challenging to convince city folks that it's worth it to go to rural places. And I as a recovering city dweller, I'm never going back. I'm willing to take the lack of concert venues, I guess. I don't, for these beautiful scenic views. I took this photograph from right up the hill, and just a beautiful place to live, a place that I, want to raise my daughter in. Rural places are excellent. You build a really deep community. So if you can live without concert venues and a really complex variety of cuisines, world cuisines, then it's worth it.
I think when we were talking the other day, you mentioned something like this as well, feeling like it's hard to watch Condon as economics and other issues pull people away. Did you want to say a little bit about that before I go back to Phil?
Yeah, it's a great little community, and bigger isn't better, but I think that we have to redefine the scope of our community. And so like for us, we may have to expand to the Dalles, Hood River, some of those are now part of our community. That's where we go to buy food, I guess, and things. We have a nice grocery store in Condon. We have everything we need, so then we can go to the city and really enjoy it. We don't have to worry about all the hassles of living in the city. We can just go and enjoy it. So that's our take.
So Phil, I have a slightly different question for you. There are a lot of competing water uses in the Deschutes Basin, as you more or less laid out. How can water administrators, land use folks, et cetera, how do we think about balancing all those uses? How do we come up with a maybe better, maybe worse? Is there a way to think about that?
You know, if you've seen one river basin, you've seen one river basin. And in the Deschutes, it's I like to say that we are very lucky and that I expect us to do more than we have so far. You know, even though we've done what to many other river, you know, other communities is impressive in terms of the amount of water saved and shared already. We can do a lot more. And it's because we have a lot of slack in the system, basically. You know, there are farmers in the Central Oregon Irrigation District who have 5 acre-feet of water per acre of land of rights. And that is a lot of water to put on a piece of land. While, you know, that some of the high precision farmers in the northern part of the basin, you know, they're growing crops in global commodity markets with 2 acre-feet of water per acre of land. So the amount of water that leaks out the bottom of canals, the amount of kind of the abundant water rights that some farmers have, those should be relatively easy places to save water, so that we can meet some of the other needs. That's at least in our surface water system. So kind of talking about the balance between, you know, senior irrigation right farmers and junior irrigation right farmers. But the groundwater situation is really, I think is going to be a lot harder for us to figure out, because we're not taking that much water out of the ground as is. And the opportunities to conserve among you know, cities and domestic users, it's like little increments per household, and you need to save a whole lot across a whole lot of households to actually have it add up to anything, you know, real in terms of conserved water that then, you know, can address other needs, such as, you know, keeping your aquifer recharged. So that's the one that I am more worried about than I think we know how to save water in agriculture to meet other agricultural users' needs and to meet our river needs. But I am really concerned myself about how we find water for our growing communities and for our homes.
Thank you for that, Phil. Well, I just got the order to wrap up, so we're going to be finishing our Q&A here. I appreciate all the folks that sent us questions, and I really appreciate the panelists in their conversation being very open and transparent with their thoughts with us. Thank you for that, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jim.
Thank you, Karen, so much. I always hate when we come to this moment in a webinar where we have to close, because these conversations are so rich. And what I really appreciate about each of our panelists is that you're not only serving your own communities, but you're also serving on regional and state bodies and boards and advising, and really kind of sharing your thought leadership with the rest of the state as well. And so I just want to thank each of you for what you're doing, not only locally, but also more broadly. Danny and Tom and Phil, we really want to continue this conversation. And I would really like to invite really our entire audience to continue this conversation and look for those